Hi everybody, Mrs. Rayburn here. Sometimes the most difficult part of creating artwork can be deciding what it is that you want to make. At times, the ideas will flow like water, and at other times, boom, artist block. When this happens, there are some things that you can do to spur on your imagination. Anything from going for a walk, reading a good book, listening to some new music can help to inspire your next great idea. In this video, I am going to discuss how you can use literature to inspire your next big idea. So, what do we mean by literature? For me, this means the written word or everything that began as written or spoken words. Anything from poetry to the takeout menu from your favorite restaurant could be a contender. Artists who create images for books, magazines, textbooks, children's books, etc. are called illustrators. Basically, they create images to complement, decorate, and aid in the understanding of written content. Illustration is one of the oldest ways of communicating a story, other than speaking aloud. It actually predates formal writing. Just think of ancient man painting on cave walls, decoration on ancient Greek pottery, or Egyptian hieroglyphs. Nowadays, we are so surrounded by imagery like this that we often don't even notice it. Even movies are illustrations in a way. They are the visual storytelling of a script that someone has written. And if that's not enough, many of those scripts started as novels or plays themselves. So even within the category of literature, you can see that there are still many options to narrow down. For the example I will be working on in this video, I have been inspired by a fairy tale. Fairy tales are a fun subject to work from because, although they are often short, they are full of vivid imagery and fantastical and imaginative scenes. I chose a somewhat lesser-known Grimm fairy tale called The Elves, or The Elves and the Shoemaker, as it is more commonly known. I have always loved the idea of little creatures like elves, gnomes, or fairies that live just out of our sight. One of my favorite illustrators, Rain Portfleet, illustrated books with Will Hugan about gnomes that explain the life and habits of gnomes and their fantasy world. This is probably one of the reasons I was drawn to this tale as inspiration. You do want to be careful not to copy other artists when making your artwork. It is good to be inspired and influenced by them, but make sure that when you are working to put away those visuals, or it may be difficult to express your own vision of the story without it looking just like someone else's art. And remember, we are always striving for originality. If you want to be truly original, you could even try writing your own story and illustrating it yourself. So to prepare for this project, I did some sketching to figure out what I wanted my final piece of artwork to look like. And I did that sketching in my sketchbook. So I actually started on this page here, and I just sort of, without looking at anything, just started sketching the faces of what I imagined in my head that the little elves might look like. What I found is because I wasn't using a reference, it started to look a lot like people that I know. In fact, this elf, to me, looks a lot like my husband. And since I don't want all of my elves in my picture to look like some version of my husband, I decided it was time to pull out some reference photos. I looked up pictures of, because I want the elves to sort of look like short little stout men. And so I thought, I wanted their heads to be out of proportion, a little bit larger for their bodies. So I thought, well, maybe if I look at the body of a baby, then that would give me an idea of some good proportions that I could guide off of for my elves. So these are thumbnail drawings. These are not very detailed, but it's just a way for me to decide where I'm going to put different elements of my composition, how many little elves I want to have, where would the shoe be placed, different ideas that I have for how I'm going to lay it out. And then today I spent some time doing a little bit more detailed of a sketch. I was focusing a little bit more on the shoe today. I was drawing my own shoe that you can see right here, because when I read the story, it made me think about the fact that my own shoes need a little bit of repair. I have this hole in the toe that makes my socks get wet every time it rains. Instead of using an old old-fashioned shoe, an old-fashioned leather shoe that you would find in a shoemaker's shop. I decided to make it a little bit more personal and use my own falling apart sneaker. As a reference, instead of looking at a photograph, I was able to look at my actual shoe. So I started sketching that so that I could become familiar with how to do that. And then I started to indicate like where I might want to put my little elves. There once was a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, became so poor that at last he had nothing left but just enough leather to make one pair of shoes. He cut out the shoes at night so as to set to work upon them the next morning, and as he had a good conscience, he laid himself quietly down in his bed, committed himself to heaven, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers and was going to get to work, he found the pair of shoes made and finished and standing on his table. He was very much astonished and could not tell what to think, and he took the shoes in his hand to examine them more closely, and they were so well made that every stitch was in its right place, just as if they had come from the hand of a master workman. One night, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out and before he went to bed, he said to his wife, "How would it be if we were to sit up tonight and see who it is that does us this service?" His wife agreed and set a light to burn. Then they both hid in a corner of the room behind some coats that were hanging up, and then they began to watch. As soon as it was midnight, they saw come in two neatly formed naked little men, who seated themselves before the shoemaker's table and took up the work that was already prepared, and began to stitch, to piece, and to hammer so cleverly and quickly with their little fingers that the shoemaker's eyes could scarcely follow them. So full of wonder was he, and they never left off until everything was finished and was standing ready on the table, and then they jumped up and ran off. The next morning, the shoemaker's wife said to her husband, "Those little men have made us rich, and we ought to show ourselves grateful. With all their running about and having nothing to cover them, they must be very cold. I'll tell you what, I will make little shirts, coats, waistcoats, and breeches for them, and knit each of them a pair of stockings, and you shall make each of them a pair of shoes." The husband consented willingly, and at night, when everything was finished, they laid the gifts together on the table, instead of the cut-out work, and placed themselves so they could observe how the little men would behave. When midnight came, they rushed in ready to set to work, but when they found, instead of the pieces of prepared leather, the neat little garments put ready for them, they stood a moment in surprise, and then they showed the greatest delight. With the greatest swiftness they took up the pretty garments and slipped them on, singing, "What spruce and dandy boys are we! No longer cobblers we will be." Then they hopped and danced about, jumping over the chairs and tables, and at last they danced out the door. From that time they were never seen again, but it always went well with the shoemaker as long as he lived, and whatever he took in hand prospered. The end. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun making this piece of artwork. It was quite a bit of work, and I probably put a little bit more into it than I had planned on it, but I really kind of got into it once I started drawing. Sometimes I tend to overwork things, so I tried my best not to use too many colors and sort of limit myself to black and white and gray. But boy, was I dying to put some color into this picture, so who knows, I might go back and rework it. But right now I'm pretty happy with it. I think it does a really good job of expressing the idea that I had about the fairy tale, the elves, and how it sort of inspired me to create this picture of my own beat up shoe getting taken care of by these little elf guys. So it's not that I specifically illustrated the story, but I used the story to inspire me to make this artwork. So there's lots of different ways you can use literature to give you ideas. I hope you had fun. Thanks for watching.